one, and we are recording on Tuesday, December 16th, 2025 at 10:03 a.m. Eastern. Yeah, I have to say for everybody listening, the last words mentioned before we start recording where I got a couple bodies I got to dump in a landfill, and I've never had that going into a show. So just want to just want to make a note of that. But everybody watching knows everybody here. Mr. John Waters has
Hey,
been on here once before. Jim's been on here a trillion times, EM2. But putting this show together is kind of three writers and then me, the idiot, sitting here in the corner. So, EM, I'm gonna kind of let you and guys, please go in the description, find the links to all their Substacks, Twitters, writings, all that good stuff. EM, I'm gonna kind of let you spearhead this in whichever way you want to take it.
well, the thing that is most on my mind right now with respect to the literary community is that where are our great orators? Whenever societies or civilizations or peoples have gotten to this kind of place, you had great orators come forward and reawaken the spirit of the people.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and
That's a curious point you're making.
and I'm not seeing it, right? And some people are saying some things. I write some things, sometimes sober, sometimes not. Well, sober things. Well, whether I'm sober or not when I write it, or a different statement. But I'm concerned right now because I'm not seeing the literary community whose historical role is to remind us of who and what we are, and to keep that spirit alive in us. I'm not seeing the emergence of a great orator. And you can't get great leaders, right? And you can't get great movements without great oration.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that at various times in the last few years. And my theory is that this has to do with the age of irony, that irony and rhetoric don't mix.
Yeah.
And because we have our cultures have become so ironic and so knowing, where everybody has a kind of a reference to everything back and then a back and back and back, and therefore an orator would become himself self-conscious unless he had been out on a planet for a long time about actually sounding the way that an orator, the person you're talking about, would need to be. So he would start to undermine his own rhetoric by making jokes about it and so on.
Yeah.
And I think that's fundamentally what the problem is. I think also the context, the internet again, we keep coming back to the internet, but that the internet has kind of created such a it has destroyed poetic language in the world. Like it wasn't unusual in the past, and for poetry to kind of seep into ordinary life. Through kind of people who were called characters. I know in Ireland they were called characters. And that's not allowed anymore. People look askance at those kinds of people and think that they're crazy and want to put them in a mental hospital. That's another factor. I think just various things like that I think have, it's almost as if it's no longer, the importance of being earnest is no longer a thing. You can't be earnest. You must be ironic. You must be droll. Or else you must be a stupid politician who can speak who in a very banal way, in platitudes, things that would get. Would get a round of applause. Every paragraph is spoken like a speech that you would make on a talk show in order to get a round of applause from the audience. So it's more platitudinous. So if you want to say something really meaningful and get that round of applause, what you say is that you're like, I am opposed to plane crashes. I am utterly opposed to them. I want to put a stop to plane crashes forever. And then you get the crowd, everybody rises to their feet and claps you. So that's kind of the world now, isn't it?
It's theater kid energy.
Theater kids that are no longer shoved in wall lockers.
Yeah. No, that's
Well,
right. It's performative.
if I may say, we have to consider, as Marshall McLuhan might have pointed out, what exactly the medium is or the media are. And we are in what might be described as a great confusion of media, where they are competing with each other for people's attention. Some of them are oral and some of them are written. So, you have this tremendous competition between TikTok, YouTube, podcasters, and then you have the people who actually stand in front of audiences and speak, like Mr. Trump. Now, I happen to be in favor of Mr. Trump's regime. I, I've become an enemy of the Democratic Party in my country, which I used to be a member of. I was a registered Democrat for many years, for 40 years, and now I regard them as a kind of politically psychopathic enemy to be fought all the time. Now, Mr. Trump is regarded as some kind of a champion orator. I find him to be disappointingly incoherent much of the time, and there are figures in our culture, like Scott Adams, the unfortunate Scott Adams, who's now sort of very, very ill and maybe on his way out. But Scott is very, very coherent. He's one of the more coherent voices in our world. And he's a champion of Donald Trump's persuasive talents. Scott Adams, one of Scott Adams' talents is that he's a trained hypnotist, and he's very, very concerned with people's persuasive powers. And he finds Donald Trump to be uncannily talented at persuasion. That may be the case, but I find myself consistently disappointed with his presentation, and especially with his childishness. On the other hand, I'm very much on board with his program, which is a very comprehensive overhaul of the way we govern ourselves. Anyway, so there's that, the competition and confusion of media. Are we a TikTok culture? Are we a TV culture? Are we a live audience culture? Are we a podcast culture? One of the things we are increasingly not so much is a literary culture.
Yeah.
And I'm a practicing literary artist. That might sound pretentious, but I write novels.
Yes, go with it. Don't.
Well, I write novels. And
never apologize for being pretentious.
All right. So anyway, I write novels, and what I'm doing by writing novels is following the literary programming of my youth, which was, really the 1970s and 80s, when I converted from being a newspaper reporter to being a novelist. Very consciously dropped out of journalism to write novels. That was what you were supposed to do. Now, in the decades since then, our society, our culture has ceased to give a fuck about literature very much. In fact, I doubt that I can only name one novelist right now who I think has a whole lot of value, and that's Amor Towles. I'd also add myself, because we're being pretentious today. But otherwise, the American public, and I dare say the European public to a large extent, doesn't give a fuck about literature. We don't know where the novel is going as a cultural artifact. It looks like it's on the way out. As very strangely, the motion picture even appears to be on the way out. The motion picture, being one of the major art forms of our lifetime, seems to be dying. The other major art form of our lifetime has already died, and that's the long playing record. That died a long time ago, as did its successor, the CD. So all these art forms are in flux, and so what voices are really out there? And I can name a few of them. In the public arena, there are people like Scott Adams and Ben Shapiro and Brett Weinstein and Tucker Carlson and Candace, and these are mostly on the right side of the political spectrum. On the left side of the spectrum, you have characters like Gavin Newsom, who, for all of his defects as a political figure, does have a lot of talent as a performer. Plus he's movie star handsome, and the girls love him. And then you have, real kind of chimeras like Jasmine Crockett and people of her ilk. Anyway, the voices are out there. Probably the two that I would name as being probably the most potent speakers to their own publics right now that I can think of are Victor Davis Hanson and Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, when you see him in action, is about as coherent as it gets. And he seems to have a deep and comprehensive and coherent understanding of history and his own culture and the state of the world. Anyway, I've been talking a long time.
I want to interject real quick. But what you said about apologizing for being pretentious, I think is what John was saying at the beginning. Is there is this whole, and I see it just doing podcast interviews. You have a lot of people that will say, I don't mean to come across as, or they'll say like, I'm not a crazy right winger, but all these qualifications are often self-imposed, and it's okay to be like, I don't want to come. It's like, no, just say what you believe. You're not putting a gun to someone's head. So I find that a lot in the podcast world. Is like, no, don't apologize. You don't have to come out and preface it with saying I'm not a MAGA Nazi. It's like, just say what you are and what you're doing. I think, if I'm correct, I think that's what John was saying, is like, don't.
I was reading an essay recently by David Mamet. I think that's the way he pronounced. He's the American playwright, and he was listing all the greats of the American 20th century literature, 21st century, and he says, I said something like, I should be in this, but I'm not going to put myself in it. Okay, and then he moved on, and I think that's a very proper thing to say. If you honor yourself, Patrick Kavanagh, the great Irish poet, said, one should always tell the truth even when it is in favor of oneself. And I firmly believe that. I agree very much with Jim about Donald Trump, actually. And I also agree with Scott Adams. I think both are correct. That Trump is disappointing in a certain sense because he's not a great orator in the traditional sense. But what Scott Adams is saying is that he has discovered a language that can communicate through all the different layers of our culture to the maximum number of people. And he does that in all kinds of weird ways that sound wrong, that sound off in terms of, to anybody who's kind of practiced at thinking, well, who's a good speaker? Like he will do something like, he will do a kind of, like I remember, for example, he did in the first term, I was very struck by this. I saw him, had a budget thing where he was giving some benefits back to the working families and so on, and subsidies and so on. And then he kind of outlined what the program was, and then he kind of paused and said, they're going to be so happy. I thought, whoa, that's incredible. No politician speaks like that. I mean, because you can feel the emotion of that. You can feel him sharing their happiness. They're gathered around the table. They're they're talking about, we're going to get this little bit more money next month. Whoa, this is good, And Trump sees them, and he's there, and he says, they're going to be so happy. That's his genius. That's what I think Scott Adams is talking about. It's these touches that you kind of, sometimes he really scared. I mean, Trump, his latest one, for example, which I won't go into the details of it, somebody else can if they want, but it strikes me as the one thing you got to say about him, he's totally honest and he doesn't care. And there's a lot to be said for those two virtues in the modern world.
So the man who formalized our society and civilization, not society, but our civilization, Alfred the Great, had to communicate in one way as a great orator to bring all these peoples together. And King Richard the Lionheart had to speak in another way because they were at war, crusade and war, and needed to be one of the people. We're heading into war. Mm-hmm. And we need a guy who speaks more like Richard the Lionheart. Blunt, direct, genuine, right? This is the way a prince talks to their people. It's not a politician. Politicians can't speak that way because it's not their people. Politicians work for whoever owns them, right? For the owners. Trump's an owner, so Trump can speak as a prince. He can speak from, so it's a form of oration for the time. But
Yeah.
I want to go back, Jim, to something you were articulating, right? The great orators sometimes wrote books, but a lot of them wrote pamphlets, right? Or little missives, that would get tacked up. And people would read them and people would talk about them and people would pass those around. And, we have the media to do that, right? Twitter in particular, we have the media to do those things.
Well, hold on a second. Some of the greatest orators of American culture they weren't orators, communicators.
Yeah.
We're not orators at all. Thomas Paine, the Englishman who, inspired to some degree the ethos of the American Revolution, communicated strictly through pamphlets.
Yeah, that's exactly what to me, most of the oration that I know of are not speeches. Yeah. Right. Most of the oration I know of are Thomas Paine.
Jefferson is not noted for his speeches at all, but he is for the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
So these various media are quite separate. William Jennings Bryan was the great stirring speaker of the late 19th century, and yet he's completely forgotten by our culture, and to some degree has been painted as a clown through some of the dramatic presentations of his behavior, like his portrayal in the Scopes trial in 1925 when he was an old man in plays and movies. So, being a great orator, the great orators of Lincoln's time, Edward Everett, I believe it was either Edward Everett or some other guy preceded Lincoln at Gettysburg and spoke for 2 hours. And Lincoln spoke for about, 3.5 minutes. And Lincoln's oration is remembered, and the other great orator is not.
So let's qualify a word. To me, the orator is not necessarily the one that speaks, because generally the one who speaks, except for Trump just he doesn't use script writers just for some things, etc. But generally, the great speeches were written by somebody else.
Yeah,
by the writers.
Kennedy's words were mostly manufactured by Ted Sorensen and Arthur Schlesinger Jr.
Right. So the great.
Excuse me. Weren't those speeches also formulated on the basis of conversations between the scriptwriter and it was intensely Kennedy's views that were being.
Yeah, one would assume.
Yeah, but independent of that, you have writers who are writing things in support. Nuanced aspects of things, right? I'm not seeing, most of the books that get published now are pure trash because there's some kind of, bribery payout to some voice out there in the world for, feeding some line of trash into the world, right? It's really hard to get a book deal anymore unless you're, a party member. But I'm not seeing, most of the things I'm seeing from the writing community. And I agree with you that, one, never apologize. If you're genuine, never apologize for anything. If they're going to take umbrage, they're going to take umbrage, whether you qualify your statement or not.
Yeah.
Let them take the umbrage. We need to stop doing that. But what I'm not seeing is the great writers of your generation, right? The boomer generation and then the Xer generation. And I don't know if we have many great writers in the millennials or Zoomers yet, but I'm not seeing us do the things that the older generations did when we were in these kinds of times.
Yes, I agree. I was just Jim's list. I mean, I've had one ex-American writer at the very top of that list, and that's Michel Houellebecq.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. I should have stuck him in there after Immortals.
Yeah, he's written his last book, or so he claims, which is called Annihilate, and it's a very, very interesting book, very moving book, very unlike his earlier books. But the thing about him is, I hate to say that he writes books that's relevant or engaging, but they are very much books about the world as it is and the humanity as it is. And I mean that's something that within the, if you like, the ideology of literature in the modern world, that's anathema now. That one is not permitted to engage with the political reality. I mean, you just think about, say, Shakespeare. I mean, not alone was he's everything in his plays is rhetorical. It is oration, but also they're all political plays. They are based in unapologetically in political context. Pretty much all of them. And that now is kind of, most writers, directors, they turn up their nose at that idea and they tell you, no, the theater is not a place for speechifying. Well, of course it's not. But, I think it's Tom Stoppard, who died recently, who was probably one of the great modern exponents, talked about this as the theater is really where there are two layers, one in which is embedded in the other. The social is the bed, and then the human is embedded in that. And the play is about both, but it is led by the human element. And that's really what is missing, that understanding, because what we actually have, in a sense, now in the theater is soap opera on the stage. And as a result, theatres are closing down all over the world, including in Broadway and all of these places, which were once the epicenter of the theatrical life of the West. The theatre, which was, the foremost, most democratic medium, because it's the medium in which if you put something forward, it is immediately judged by an audience of your peers, and if they don't like it, they'll stay away. Unlike other, it's so we're in big trouble in lots of ways in our culture for all these reasons. And there really isn't a single, I don't think, cause of it. It's except that it's creating a degeneration of the human imagination generally.
Because I do think that there is one thing that we can attribute it to.
Yes.
And that is the takeover of cultural institutions by women who are imposing female psychodrama on everything that we do. Yes. And making it impossible for men to exercise their cultural strengths.
Or even healthy women.
Yeah. Although some of the bloggers who I admire for their writing the most are women, like Sasha Stone and I don't know, a bunch of others.
So, we're in an attention era, right? I think we're burning out of that. Conversation I had with Tommy and Steve Murray yesterday. People say, well, they're not going to read that. Have you ever played a video game that's got lore? Holy cow, some of the lore that they write for these video games is ludicrously rich and deep, and people read it. Kids read it. They know that lore.
Is it insane and psychopathic?
No,
I don't play video games.
No, some of it is absolutely
it's very
brilliant.
Detailed. It's just good writing.
And it's good writing. It captures it, and it's nuanced stuff, some character and some nuance of the character and some historical, right? I'm playing a Dragon Age right now, and the lore is astounding, right? So it's not like this thing that we're being told that the young don't read and the young won't read, serious things. They will. It's just, what's the wrapper?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm an example of that because I'm of a generation or of an age where I never really got sucked into the video game culture, and I know almost nothing about it. It has some manifestations in motion pictures and movies and TV stuff like Game of Thrones with its rich backstories. I can't stand those movies. I can't stand Lord of the Rings. I find them preposterous, and I think that they're really badly written. I wrote something about that recently. In fact, that George Lucas and Peter Jackson. George Lucas did Star Wars. Peter Jackson did the Rings movies, and they both have an observable defect in their storytelling. They don't understand dramatic action. What they do is they bring a character on stage who gives a bunch of expository stuff about things that happened off stage long ago, and then they have a battle scene, and then they bring another character on stage who tells more exposition about shit that happened long ago, and then they have another battle scene, and that's not how drama moves. Drama moves through dramatic action. And yet these people are lauded for being the great storytellers of our time. And I find them to be just hugely defective.
Yeah, I agree with that in general, and I think that tendency has moved into the novel also in a large part.
You bet.
Whereby very often with a lot of modern novelists, I notice a lot of Irish novelists like who should be much better than they are, and some of them are really great writers. But the thing is that because they don't have any fundamental belief system, in other words, there is no existential, there's no transcendent thread in their thinking. They're incapable to take the story beyond a certain point. And what you find is you read a book, and in the first, say, 50, 60 pages, you're reading this amazingly well-written book, beautifully written book, and you're envious of the writing and so on, as writers tend to be of each other. And then they move into second, and you're waiting to see where this is going to go. And actually, where it always goes is kind of into like a kind of what you might call a kind of a metaphysical car chase. It just doesn't really it just is anything to get us out of the dilemma we've got into. But there's no understanding of what the action of grace, for example, is in such a thing as a drama. And what you end up with is a book that you leave down at the very moment when you should be kind of coming to the chase, the literary chase, when you should be really hitting that moment when you said, I want to find out what this is. You lose interest. I've done that with countless books in recent years, where I never read the last 60 pages.
Yeah. This is, we're writers to come together and realize we have to stitch together who and what we are now with what we were in the past, and with some vision to what we're going to go through and what should be tomorrow, which is the purpose of great writers, I think, right? The last great cycle, 300-400 years ago, was about freedom, individual sovereignty, right? The principles, I think, most clearly defined as the Scottish Enlightenment. But that's not the problem we have now. I mean, we're being re-enslaved, absolutely and fundamentally, and just completely outright replaced by new slaves. But what is the thing that writers need to say now and remind people of? Life. That life is to be revered. And I don't mean all life in all general. I mean our lives, our families, the history of the life in our lands, the way in which, all these nuanced ways in which life has expressed itself amongst our people. Because we've forgotten that. Everything now is transactional. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, well, to take a point and somewhat hold that point, because I think we need to explore it more deeply in itself. But just to make a point about one of the things that's happening to writing, certainly in Ireland and the United Kingdom, and I think pretty much everywhere, is that the subvention of artistic mediums by basically state forces is creating a shadow censorship that nobody will acknowledge or admit to. And so that, artists, writers who used to be struggling, used to be living in garrets but still got by and wrote great books, now are a little bit more comfortable and they want to stay that way. And that's why you get sort of, there are ambivalences that one would have about the role of the artist in the world. I mean, nobody is necessarily saying that the artist has a duty to stand up and speak against power when it is being abused. But nevertheless, the way that artists in recent times have seemed to join with that power in the abuse that it is dishing out to his own people is absolutely astounding and really dismaying. That's one thing. The second thing is that, there's two roles I think that the artist has. One is to write, to be a chronicler of reality at some level. And that means to
Yes.
tell the truth. Tell the truth. The other
Yeah.
is to be the conscience, at some level, to be the conscience of his people or her
Yes.
people. And those roles are completely vacated now in Western culture, to a large, except people like Welbeck and others that you mentioned. And Tom Stoppard, to some extent, although he wasn't necessarily a foremost voice of, I remember reading articles he wrote in The Spectator about COVID, and he seemed to buy into this nonsense. So artists can be as prone to delusion as the rest of us, but. I think that there is something fundamentally wrong now, that essentially the state, the political systems have learned that artists can be very problematic creatures and therefore need to be bought and can be bought and are being bought.
I think this started, I completely agree with you, John. I think this, when I look at art post World War I and then post World War II, we see two great step changes. And what is that saying? Those who can make you believe in the absurd can make you commit atrocities. Most of the things that have been, not most, but an increasing amount of what passes for art is not art. And the high net worth folks buy, a lot of that's money laundering, by the way, straight up money laundering. So they buy up art, ludicrous art that's not art. It's trash. Like, I don't know what the whole thing with Pollock is. And Stiglitz, I think it's Stiglitz,
Yeah,
but
Stiglitz was a photographer.
yeah, it wasn't Stiglitz. What was the other one? It was the Cubist stuff. And, it's just this ludicrous stuff that increasingly after World War I, and then this was in, written word as well, although written word seemed to have lasted a bit longer than, painting world and music. And then in the 1960s, rock and roll comes along hardcore and LSD. And we go down this whole other pathway of, the music now tends to get corrupted. Now all we have is, remanufactured variations on a theme in every music genre. It's the same song. It's just got new boots on, right? So the way in which the Praetorians, the financialists figured out how to deal with this threat of the artist, of the conscience, as you say, John, and I think rightly so, right? Because it is usually the writers, the orators who stirred a war, revolution kind of war, right?
Yes.
Give me a second. So what did they do? They started buying off the art industry. And again, a lot of it's money laundering. Something like 80% of all art sales, et cetera, it's massive money laundering. And they started driving up, to ludicrous valuation works of art that are 3 centuries ago. People would look at that and say, it's just trash. It's nonsense. Maybe even 2 centuries ago. And that's now in the literary world. Maybe the literary world made it into the 80s, but then we really started to see, a shift and a transition in the 80s and 90s. And now, I've sent books up. I've had, very, very successful literary agents say, this is incredible. I could never get it published.
Of course.
Right.
That's because of the gatekeepers within all of these industries, isn't it? The publishing industry, the art industry, the movie industry, the theater industry.
Yeah.
That there are these, and that no matter how good some young person is with great new ideas, you go to these guys and they block them.
Yes.
And they want them to do essentially what worked last year, again.
Well, and it worked last year because somebody's buying that stuff. Somebody's funding that stuff. Like, didn't Michelle Obama get like an 80 million, or, these people are getting like 50, $80 million book deals.
Yeah.
And then the book
and deals with Netflix and
deals with Netflix, and the book sells 3,000 copies.
Yeah. But it's just a payoff. And what you're describing, EM, is really what's come to me is that we're seeing pervasive racketeering in every corner of culture. And let's define what racketeering is. Racketeering is basically making money dishonestly and doing things dishonestly. So you have really a culture that is increasingly based on pervasive dishonesty, but it manifests itself in strange ways. Now, in the literature industry, which let's say, exists or manifests itself as publishing, book publishing. What you have is a conveyor belt between the falsity and dishonesty of graduate schools, like the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, which churns out, all of these wannabe novelists, and the book buying public. And also, let's not forget that the real commercial node of all of that, the independent bookstore, no longer exists. So it's mostly being funneled through Amazon.com and little else. Some of those gatekeepers used to be the thousands upon thousands of independent bookstore owners who, liked certain books and promoted them and to their customers. That doesn't happen anymore. You have the idiots in graduate schools basically just promoting, authors by racial and gender categories, and that represents the whole race and gender hustle, which itself is a form of racketeering, and that pervades the graduate schools and the universities. So you have that conveyor belt of racketeering and hustling going into the book industry, and you end up with just a bunch of worthless books that end up being turned into shopping bags eventually at the pulper.
That's right, and that was Jim. That was anticipated. I think certainly in Irish culture, or in Ireland, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, an assault on the syllabus, the literary syllabus of the education system. In what was called in Ireland the Leaving Cert, which is for teenagers, adolescents up to about 18 or so. They learn about literature. They took out all the great writers that were kind of regarded as problematic, William Gould and Charles Dickens, and they put in one-legged South American lesbian poets. And that's where we are, and that's kind of what the market is now. Among those people, they don't know who Charles Dickens is.
Yeah, but they don't really sell books. That's the problem.
Correct. It's
nobody wants them.
So
yeah.
So the industry is collapsing. The publishing industry is collapsing, and I've had very very intimate workings with it, having to navigate. My career has spanned 40 years of going through the conventional publishing industry as it existed in the mid 1970s, and the newspaper and magazine industry. And I made a living for decades on book advances for books I was writing. I get paid $100,000 for on a book contract for a book that I had to deliver like 18 months later, and I lived on that stuff. It became obvious around the year 2000 that was coming to an end. So I started transitioning into a blogger, and most of my income now comes from voluntary contributions to the people who pay for my blog. And I don't have a paywall up on my blog, Clusterfuck Nation, on Substack. So all of the people who pay for it do it, voluntarily. I had to make that transition, and at the same time, I had to navigate through the deformities and perversities of what the publishing industry has become, this race and gender hustle, to find a way to publish books, because I was still writing books, because I was, conditioned to write books. And what I did was I published a few of them on my own, just experimentally, on Amazon Kindle, or not Kindle, KDP, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And I also have turned to some boutique publishers who are, small operators who are forming a new business model. And, I can't say they've been 100% successful, but I'm fortunate that I have a blog that has about 30-odd thousand readers, and I can advertise and sell my own books off of my website. And I get a much higher royalty from the boutique publishers than I used to get from the mainstream publishers. The typical mainstream publishing royalty is a sliding scale of 10% for the first 5,000, 12.5% for the next 5,000, and 15% thereafter for hardcover books, and about 7% for paperback books. And I get a much higher royalty rate from the boutique publisher, so I can sell fewer units of my books and still make a living. And that's been my way of working around it. And I'm one of the few people who I think has been able to work around it.
Yeah, well, I know that in Ireland and in the United Kingdom, it's hugely problematic if you write books, let's say nonfiction books as opposed to novels, which try to deal with the reality of what's coming in the world and what's happening in the world. The publishing industry, which should have an interest in getting hold of those manuscripts, turning them into books, and marketing them to the audience that's growing, of that growing consciousness, it does the contrary. It closes them down. It doesn't allow them into the retail network. It doesn't. It blocks them completely. You can't find them in normal bookstores. Unfortunately, most of us have to deal through Amazon, which we abhor, but it's the best system that we can possibly have. And
that's all there is.
That's all there is. And so this is the extraordinary thing that we live in a culture that, in a certain sense, was formed ideologically or in some sense by Orwell and 1984. And everybody almost read that book and took it in and took something out of it. But then when 1984 actually arrived, they looked the other way and started reading chick lit. And this is the issue that we face, that the world is actually in the situation that all these sort of Jeremiahs, as it were, predicted. And the world doesn't want to know now. There's no interest. And therefore, that suggests a radical disconnect between literature as a useful tool of human conscience and consciousness.
It's most conspicuous in the UK, where 1984 the work of literature originated, and now under Keir Starmer, Great Britain is turning into 1984 and has no cultural memory of the work of literature that warned them about it.
Yeah,
well, but if you look at Orwell and you look at Orwell and his brothers, one wonders if that was a work of fiction or if that was predictive programming.
Oh yeah,
the playbook.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
he had definitely, he had connections with the Fabian Society, possibly with MI5, for sure. And just as Aldous Huxley, to his brother Julian, had connections. Both of those two books. But nevertheless, notwithstanding all that, you have to actually think in terms of Orwell that. He wrote that book when he was dying of tuberculosis. So he was desperate. He was a race against death, literally. Yeah. And he got the book done. And whatever the motivation, whatever was the original impulse, it seems to me that clearly in the end he was working as a great artist.
As men approach their death, and this is a very well-known thing. This is why criminal organizations and secret organizations off older men before they reach this point, or as they start to reach this point. But old men tend to get a conscience towards the end of their life, and they tend to start telling the truth.
Well, Orwell wasn't old, you see. That's the terrible thing.
Well, right? It's the same though. He was approaching the end of his life. Right?
Yeah. He literally sat up in bed while he was dying of tuberculosis and typed that out with the typewriter on his knees. Like, it's incredible. Lions
approaching their end, right? Yeah. Lions approaching their end. Act like lions. Yeah.
And the thing about that book, and maybe we can have disagreement about this, but my sense of those two books, because of course Orwell was for briefly a pupil of but I would judge those books now. I read them both again last year because I hadn't read them, as it were, before our 1984 began, as it were. I read them post the original 1984, or no, just before actually. But and what it seems to me now is that Orwell's book what Tom Stoppard says about the embedding of human reality in a social construct. That's perfectly done in 1984. I mean, because the story of Orwell or of Winston and Julia is this, and then that's a love affair, right? But there's also this other bizarre love affair, almost a sadomasochistic love affair between Winston and O'Brien, which is, these are the two love affairs, as it were, in scare quotes, which define the book. Now, if you go into, I tried several times to reread Brave New World. I can't read it. It seems to me to be, it's a message book.
Yeah.
It's an issue pamphlet. It's like, which is fine. It's fine, but it's not a novel.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit, because this is where I'm really interested in you, more experienced writers with much longer time. I didn't come to writing really. I mean, I've been writing for a long time, but to being a writer, it's all I was in my 50s, right? I took Michener's statement to heart when I first tried to write in my 20s. I could write a good story, but it wasn't rich. It didn't have, I hadn't lived enough life. I hadn't done enough things in the world. So I took up writing in my 50s here just in the last couple of years, getting serious about it. Every peoples that have survived the type of, broad spectrum malaise and malevolence that is that is ending our people. Those have always been, those periods, those people who survived have always had great writers, orators that have come forward and really found a way to encapsulate why we need to stand, why we need to hold, why we need to, do the unpleasant, ugly bits.
Yes.
And
I agree. Yes.
Right. It's the
I would account for it in a certain way I think we are going through a period of kind of degenerative flux in which we are not capable of constructing a coherent consensus about reality. We can't construct a coherent consensus about what is happening or make a coherent plan for how we're going to get through it. But this is part of the process. I maintain that, life, the human project, is basically an emergent phenomenon, which is to say, it has the character of an organism that is self-organizing. And what you have is this organism that responds to the stimuli that's coming into it at the time. And the stimuli that's coming into us right now is very disordered. And we have become disordered. And we can't create a coherent consensus. So,
we can through great writing.
Well, there are, there are people who endeavor to try to make coherent what we're going through, but they're doing it through a torrent of noise that makes it very difficult for the message to get through.
And they're doing it isolated. It's not a group of writers.
That's why there's no consensus. The consensus, consensus is what brings it together, and the consensus is not there.
Yeah. I think this is a way of framing this. I think maybe we can tease something out of this, because if you go back to 1989 in Prague, the Velvet Revolution, which was led by Václav Havel, a playwright, a philosopher, who had written numerous plays in very absurdist, clearly allegorical in terms of the context of what was happening, channeling a message under a subterranean basis culturally, and also his essays, which were profoundly, didactic, in the sense that they were addressing fundamentally the conditions in which the people of Czechoslovakia, as it was then, were living. And that somehow gelled around a movement which really lasted for 25, 30 years, underground in Prague and other places, and eventually was victorious. And you look around now, and I to look at around the West now at the various things which entities that call themselves the resistance or the freedom movement. There's no evidence anywhere of anything remotely like that.
Yeah.
You have you have just raggle-taggle groups of people, disagreeing, fighting among themselves, egomaniacs going crazy. There's nothing emerging from it very much. And if there is, it's repudiated by the greater number. They say, "Oh, you're over people's heads. This stuff, it's all nobody talking about Solzhenitsyn. People don't know what you're talking about. This sort of nonsense." I get this all the time.
Yes.
Now, this is an amazing thing. Obviously, it has to do a lot with the factors we've already adumbrated. They particularly the subvention of art, for example. That has, I find it amazing, for example, like musicians even, like they're literally reciting the lines they hear on the TV. And these are guys who are capable of writing great music, great songs, great pieces of music, but they don't seem to, and again, it has got to be put down to the lure of security. More than any other factor, I think.
I think belonging. I think it's status and belonging more than it is security.
I think that you have to consider a couple of other things. One is that when a society enters a period of disorder like this, especially one of collective mental disorder, that to some extent you just have to, as they say, embrace the suck and get through it. You have to endure. You have to just persevere and get through it. And the other thing is that the signal problem that I see many of us having is that we cannot locate and identify the exact source of this evil that is coming at us. This force that is that appears to be seeking to actively disintegrate our culture and our politics. We have all our suppositions about it, and we have all of these cartoon characters who we assign it to, whether it's, Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates, et cetera, et cetera. But we can't really locate what this massive impulse is to destroy Western civilization. And so between those two things, somehow we just have to endure through it and persevere, and that's my thought for the moment.
We won't survive. Straight up, where we are right now is we will not survive as a people.
Well, that's one response to going through a very dark passage, and I think that there is a tendency for certain personality types, perhaps your personality type, to feel that way and to feel very discouraged. I, on the other hand, am more constitutionally cheerful.
Yes, I had a book out earlier this year, which is a book of essays I've written over the last 6 years, and it very much addresses what you've summarized there, Jim. That dilemma, that question, what is going on here? And I don't say that necessarily I've answered it. I don't think anybody has answered it. Everybody has a different answer, but nobody has given the answer that seems to be absolutely fit the centerpiece of the jigsaw.
John, it's most peculiar in Ireland, which is a small country with a small population. And you'd think you would be able to determine who the hell is it in your country.
It's not a who.
What is it in your country that's trying to, of the small number of people who are trying to destroy your country?
It's a globalist cabal, for sure.
Yeah, but who are they in your country?
Okay, but hold on a second.
No, they're not in our country. They're simply, their instructions are fed down.
Correct.
It's the functions of the system.
We're at war.
Who are the people receiving the instructions in your country? Who are carrying them out?
There are innumerable, what would appear to be simply functional entities, PR companies,
NGOs,
those
kind of organizations who channel the energy and the instructions to the political actors.
How come the energy of the IRA has not been set against?
Because that was a British operation. Because IRA was a British operation.
Is it
specifically to put Sinn Féin in place, because Sinn Féin is the one who's okay. So Jim, I want to go back to something to John and get your take. We are at war. We're at
Yeah.
war just the same as the trenches of Europe in World War One, just as the beaches of Normandy. We are at war.
Yes.
It is an estrogenic war. They threw men at us, millions of men at us to destroy us across the entire, across the first half of the last century. And then other wars, Bush wars over the last 80 years to try and destroy us. They realized they can't win men on men conflict with us. So they sent the women. They sent estrogen, right? And the estrogen tactics and techniques. And it's winning, it's succeeding. Why? Because we're looking for somebody, Jim, to your point. Everybody's like looking for some name. If we can just deal with that. That's not how this works. Estrogens make sure that you could almost never point to anything. You ever been in an argument with a woman?
Oh my God!
Right?
Are you kidding me?
Okay, so the
I
fundamental
divorced
piece,
3 of them.
Well, there you go. So you're a professional. So here's the problem that we have, and again, this gets back to writers and how do we articulate where we are. Is we're at a natural place that happens in the English-speaking people like clockwork every 400 years. It's just everything gets so corrupted. It's just by nature, right? It's a dissipative structure. The dissipative structure that emerged as an emergent property and all this complexity 400 years ago has run its course. It can no longer be thermodynamically, conservation of energy wise, and lies cannot be sustained. So we're in a liminal state where everything's breaking down. Okay, well, everybody's making their move to put in place the new dissipative structure in which they have higher status and power. That's what's happening. That's why it's almost impossible to point to anybody or any one entity because there's 30 of them of fairly equal peerage that are working to, tear down, accelerate the destruction of the old dissipative structure and to be the ones who feed and seed and dominate in the next structure that emerges. And the ones driving it, the mindset driving this cycle is estrogen. And it works very differently. Yeah, sorry, John.
A question then, Ian. How is it that in this particular, what you sketched there, that the notion of the good, which has informed our life, albeit that we might have been coming to the end of the cycle, nevertheless, I'm 70 years of age, and I was astonished by what happened in 2020. Maybe I was a little bit out of the loop or whatever, but for most of my life, almost every sentence I heard from any authority source, from any source of culture, was directed at the good, the welfare of humanity in general and in particular.
Most of those were lies, though. Yeah, but sorry, go ahead.
But on some night, indeterminate night, perhaps around the middle of March in 2020, we woke up the following morning and osmotically began to pick up that this had all changed, that it was no longer important to be working for the good welfare of men or women. It was no longer to be for example, it was no longer an argument. For example, last week in Britain, a judge said that a rapist from, I think, Somalia had to be understood that he come from a culture in which it isn't understood that rape is a bad thing. Now, that would have been impossible to say in this country before 2019, before 2020, or in Britain. It's just impossible. And what I'm saying is that overnight, and it has something, I think, to do with the absence of the conscience that we talked about earlier, but that's not the complete picture, I think, that notion that we are all agreed that no matter how much we may disagree about details, we are all on the same mission to make the world better for each other and for our children and for all of humanity where possible. And yet that's gone and has been replaced by a series of self-contradictory, inane, moronic principles, compassion, pseudo-compassion, for foreigners over your own people. Like you're supposed to neglect your own children in favor of the children of some foreign country, so on. Or else you're a bad person.
This is estrogenic warfare. What happened is in 20s, and the unfortunate thing is most of the concepts, anything that comes out of government talks about humanity is against humanity. I mean, we just got to take that as a given.
Yeah.
What happened in 2020 is the veil was lifted. The veil was lifted. people really need to look at women more closely and in intra-sex competition between women. And when you have enough women who rise up in positions of influence and power, you are now in intra-sex, female versus female intersex competition. Well, we've been crossing that threshold from, some balance between testosterone and estrogen in the competitive space, and they compete very differently. Men tend to actually collaborate far more than women, genuinely collaborate, because
women just share, they don't collaborate.
They share, and then
for psychodrama, for the sake of psychodrama. They thrive on that.
But by the same token, men, I have found, only fight for issues which relate to the male sex, while those issues affect them directly.
No.
I don't
the
think
only
so.
thing the male.
Well,
the only
I can tell you. Let me give you an illustration.
Okay.
For many years, I wrote about the treatment of fathers in family courts, and as a consequence of that, I had various relationships with groups who were organising around those issues, and I would occasionally go to their meetings and sit in and listen to what was being said and so on, and talk to people and maybe speak at the meeting and so on. And one of the things that I found out about that whole pattern was that men had a tendency to come to the meetings when they were themselves in trouble, to try to solve their own problem. But once their own problem was either solved or it went away or it just got so bad that they had to walk away from it, they stopped being interested in the question.
Okay, so give me
that
1
leads
second.
me to come to that women gather around the shrine of feminism, right? There is no shrine of manhood for men to gather around.
War, violence, and the judicious use of violence to protect our children.
Yeah,
right? So
and I would add to that,
Mm-hmm.
it's characteristic of Western civilization at its best for men to be interested in the proper ordering of society, and not just their own interests.
Which requires, and so somebody put a meme out this morning or a Twitter post. It really caught me because it was brilliant. It was a woman that did it. And it said, men only want one thing, and it isn't wealth and power. And then it switches, and it's a man with his 3-year-old child playing out in the snow. Right? This is, so what people need to, what we have to understand is that what happened in 2020 is estrogen made its move. The female. Sorry. Give me a second. Females, what we have to really take a step back and look at, historically, women sacrificed a lot of their children in conflict, in hard labor, in raids, in, selling their kids off for slavery in order to protect the village, the community. All of that wiring is still in us. That's how women earned their status, their status in place, particularly their sons, sacrificing their sons, and sometimes their daughters. That wiring is still in there. The last century is an abnormality, and it's only been in the West. It hasn't been in much of the rest of the world.
Well, yeah. I used a photograph on an article I put up last week on Substack. The article was it's about the transcendent idea in civilization and how we retain it, how we recover it if we can. But I used at the top an illustration that I was dealing to a degree with the kind of culture of the 1960s in the article, and I found a photograph which had in it three couples. 3 almost identical blonde women with mini skirts, 3 men with long hair, and they were in a line, and each couple were kissing, not particularly, intensively, but and I was looking at it. I said, why am I attracted to this picture? It wasn't the women. It was something about the paradox. That here we are, this picture, it looks corny now, it looks coy, because suddenly they're like they've discovered sex, right? And the 60s gave us sex, this type of thing. And it's that idea, we're all at it, it's great, we're free now, And yet when I was thinking about it, that the feminists would have looked at that picture at the time, even at the time, and disapproved of it, because that was women presenting themselves as, objects to men, etc., and so on. We know the arguments. But now we move down to 2024, 25, and we look at the demographic of the West, which has gone through the floor. Despite this explosion of alleged, enthusiasm for heteronormative activity, right? The demographic of the West has collapsed in the wake of this revolution that we were told had occurred.
Because we have two competing models. Men's status, right? The highest status men. I'm a warfighter. I come from warfighting. I also come from finance. I come from tech. I've done a whole bunch of different things, right? I dabble in the medical space now on the research side, right? But the men that I know that I respect the most and are respected in my man community, right? The warfighter community are all without exception fathers and good fathers. Every single one of them. I know guys that are great war fighters and horrible fathers. They don't have the same respect as a guy who is a father. And this is a difference between the world of men and the world of women. For men, status is fatherhood.
Yes.
Because it's much more rare amongst men to be a father than it is for women. For women on the other side, they don't have the same status structure around children.
Actually, DM, that's finishing the point I was making earlier about the men's lack of interest in campaigning for their own alleged interests, because their real interest is in making the world safe for their women and their children.
That's it. That's it. And honestly, to be even more honest, not most, but more than a negligible amount of men aren't making the world safe for their women. They're making the world safe for their children.
Yes.
Of which, though, we need to also protect the enemy combatant, the world of women.
But here's another thing. I had an argument last week online on text with a friend of mine, a woman, very good woman, very nice woman, conservative woman, right? And she had sent me initially a short video of an African man complaining about the attack that had occurred on the Black American Black people, which he said has really cut their demographic in about taken that 2/3. They'd lost 2/3 of their demographic as a result of the kinds of things like the attacks on family, the driving of the father out of the home, the subvention
Planned Parenthood.
Yes, the deadbeat dad, all of this sort of stuff, right? And then of course abortion on top of all this, and I just didn't say, well, I've been at this stuff like for 30 years. And so I sent her back an article that I'd written a couple of years ago, which kind of summarized what I've been talking about all those years. And it was actually a review of a book by Stephen Baskerville, who's a great writer on these topics, an American man. And, and that book actually connects all of that stuff to what's happening in America now. It's a really amazing book. Stephen Baskerville, the name of it, it'll come back to me. But the thing is, she came back in what really astounded me, which was almost a cliched caricature feminist answer, which is the last thing I expected. Because she starts off saying, yeah, of course, the good father should be acknowledged and given their blah, blah. But, there are so many bad fathers and so many bad men and blah, 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 all this stuff. And I was reading this and I was kind of feeling chill. I felt this chill run down my back that, nobody sees this. And I just said, okay, can you tell me another category of humanity of whom you can make such a claim? That in order to qualify for the most fundamental entitlements of their existence, they must show that they are qualified, that they are, good people. We don't apply that to any category. We don't apply it to migrants in our own countries, which we should, obviously, at the point of entry. And this is the amazing thing, that the infiltration of this logic is that men are in the direct opposite of what you said and what I say and know to be true, that the vast majority of men, and you shouldn't even have to say this, because no category of humanity is entirely perfect. But if there is any category of humanity that is close to perfect, it is manhood.
Yes. Yes.
And this is the thing that our culture denies most vociferously.
Yes.
It doesn't just deny it, it attempts to turn it into homosexuality.
Well, and it actually works against it. So Friday night, John, to what you're saying, and Jim, that's actually absolutely true, right? They want to turn it back on itself and make it a caricature. But John, Friday night, I think it was, I'd had a few drinks. And I stumbled on this YouTube video, which is men's lines, men in movies. And three of them were Denzel Washington. And all three of those characters, who I think genuinely is an extraordinary actor and has done some of the most impactful roles. But three of those scenes were him as a black father, not always as the father. Sometimes one was a gang kid, but it was he as a black man portraying father. And some of the great, in this era, since Johnson, basically, in the 60s forward, where they've been just destroying the black community. Despite all of that, and despite all of the deadbeat dad and the absentee fathers in the black community, and just this total destruction using welfare against the black male community, the greatest examples of manhood, of fatherhood in modern movies are all by a black man. Denzel Washington, right? So the greatest, Greasy Bear from Man on Fire. It's not his biological daughter, but it's his daughter.
Well, Stephen Baskerville's analysis of the situation that we now are in is broadly this: that this assault first started on the Black American community.
Yes.
To drive the father out of the home,
Yes.
to subsidize the mother, to jettison the father.
Well, to remove the father, to remove a man from that woman's. Okay, women compete for status. If you remove a man as part of her path to higher status, now you got women, you got control. But you got to get rid of men, and you got to create these artificial status hierarchies, which is what welfare is.
Yes. Well,
right?
And the same thing then transferred right across the world.
Yes.
Western societies became just as affected by this.
Yes.
So to the point where you had a situation, and I've seen it so closely, that family law showed no distinction between successful men, failed men, energetic men. You could be the most successful businessman in your town and still be treated as a criminal in the local court on a Friday.
Well, and the mother could be insane and even violently insane, and she gets treated like a saint.
Tell me all about it.
Right? Yeah, apologies, John. That one's a little close, but yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, but this is what my point here is, that I'm not sure that, this is not news, but the point is how shocking it is, even to me, that this idea that men need to prove themselves, they need to disprove allegations against them.
You can't disprove a negative.
It is a defining characteristic of what you would call woke ideology, liberal ideology, cultural Marxist ideology. Is a defining element of those ideologies, or if they're really one, that you cannot ascribe to a whole group of people something of which one is guilty. In other words, just because there is one bad apple, you cannot say that the entire barrel is rotten. And yet, if you're talking about men, you can do precisely that.
Because this is how estrogen wages war.
Hey, women are
constantly fighting each other and making each other prove themselves. Yeah, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
Sorry. Let me introduce a strange thread here. You have this dilemma in Western civilization of the destructive feminization of manhood and the disordering of male-female relations. And you have imposed on that now in Western civilization the introduction of Islamic jihad culture. Now, I don't think I need to point out at great length how differently relations in Islamic culture are from Western Civ. It's one of the main points of friction between Islam and the West, is how Islamic people treat their women, right? And yet we have this tremendous need in Western Civ to reorder our relations between the sexes. And yet we have invited in this group of people, the Islamic migrants, who bring with them a way of ordering culture that is not something that we really want.
Well,
Women
And
do.
and so
The
the
women
question,
do.
well, the question is, when are we going to expel them?
The women. The
And is
problem
that part of the war that you're talking about?
That's definitely
Are
is.
we going to expel them? And you know,
Yes.
I'm sorry to say this,
Yes.
but I think about this, you know, several times a day when I read the news about Europe. And I just cannot fathom why the Europeans are not expelling this group of people. And I mean wholesale.
well, can I just make? You see, I have puzzled about this dilemma an awful lot because, and if you think about it as an organic problem, you won't get to the answer. In other words, if you think about it as, well, why are people behaving like this? What is their mind doing to them that they can't see this? The answer is they can see it, but they're being paid not to see it. You know, the money is actually acting. The fake money that there is being created out of the imminent supernova of Western currencies and financial systems is creating the possibility that people will ignore these things because they are being compensated financially, or many of them are, or they are under the influence of entities like media, which are being financially subsidized to put out this, to tell people that you must accept this, that these people are, you know, the most vulnerable of the Earth's people, and they're running from war and blah blah blah, and therefore you cannot even query their existence here in your country. But the point is, I think it is the money. The money distorts everything, and it's not even money because it's fake money. And one day soon we will wake up and it will be worth less than the toilet paper in the bathroom.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's not
So,
organic. It's why do these planes keep hitting skyscrapers? Well, it's an attack.
so let's.
You know, what was it not amazing that 2 days after there was slaughter at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, the Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese, Mr. Albanese, comes out and gives a diatribe against right-wing extremism rather than a diatribe against Islamic jihadism.
Exactly. Exactly.
What in the hell
okay.
is going on there?
Yeah. There's
And
always a hand.
why don't the Australians just drag him out of his
So here's
prime
where we are.
ministerial palace and string him up?
There's always a hand on the other side of the scales, you see, that we don't
Well,
see.
let's talk about the hand, the real hand that's on the scale. The hand that's on the scale is that women believe that they have to allow all this or they will not have status in the world. Because it's been demonstrated that way. If you don't allow this, if you don't allow that, if you don't look this other way, if we don't do these hires, if we don't let these people in, you don't have status in the world. And the men don't move to do the hard things, the ugly but necessary things, because, John, very much to what you said, men are still trying to prove themselves worthy to women.
So, excuse me, TCM, can you explain that a bit more? Just elaborate on that idea of status and what you mean.
Women are motivated by one thing and one thing only: status. Their status, and how can they improve their status in the community? Because evolutionary wiring has wired that into them for survival on multiple levels, right?
Yes.
And it's not just the simple stuff. It's some very complex societal dynamics. So women are wired to seek higher status. Well, who are they seeking higher status from? What world? Women. They're operating within the world of women. Now, if a man gets involved, it's because the woman binds him to her so that she can improve her status that way. But it's in the world of woman that she's trying to improve her status.
And how does this then work with the migrations issue?
So all of the funding, so the precursors to all of this has been happening in the academic system for 40 years, where you had to hire women, of a certain kind, you had to do all the intersex stuff. Give me 1 second. there's another word, I can't remember it right now.
Affirmative action.
Well, it's affirmative action, but it's not so much that. It's the, anyways, I can't remember the word right now. But the point is this: the whole system, starting in the 1960s, has been skewing towards enabling women to have a world of status that doesn't require men. In in their job placement, in the work, they're 75% of college students now. They're 40, 50%, 60, 80% of the graduate students. Right?
Yeah. And the result has been the complete collapse of authority and legitimacy in institutions in Western civilization.
They're also in government. They're in, so what's happened is men go out and do violence, completely decoupled mostly from the world of women anymore. And women rise up in all this bureaucratic managerial class stuff. Corporations. Yeah, go ahead.
And yet the women are at the front line of the attacks being perpetrated.
Okay, so here's why. High status women hate low status women. Despise them. Because that's a threat. You don't know when some low status woman's going to have some kind of complex thing comes together, and she and some capable man come together, and they upset the whole apple cart, the whole status hierarchy. This is a war. What's happening? The flooding of our countries is a war on our women by our women, to the point where you got all these white harpies, the harpies and harlots in Europe, and now the MI6 lead, right, calling for open war that will be a absolute total slaughter of the few remaining sons who are there in the lands to protect the women. This is a war by high status women on low status women.
Do you mean this business about trying to start World War III with Russia now?
Correct.
With Ms. van der Leyen?
All of them. Well, and the head of MI6 just came out the other day and said, all these problems. So what's happening is that high status women are trying to wipe out low status women. That's what's happening.
I think this ends differently, and I actually planted my flag in this ending years ago when I wrote my 4 novels under the World Made by Hand rubric, and I think it kind of redounds to something John said about 10 minutes ago about all of the fugazi money and fugazi power and energy of our techno-industrial society going up in a vapor. And it's this vaporous fugazi money and energy that allows women to be in the managerial class of society.
Correct.
And when that fugazi goes up in a vapor, we are going to be in that world made by hand where that's no longer the case. And you're going to see a quick and violent reordering of relations between the sexes and the way that society operates. But it will be, I think, at a much lower threshold or level of energy and activity. And, it's not going to be a globalized techno-industrial world anymore. And I think things like the internet will go with it.
I don't disagree, but I think something very odd is discernible in our culture, which we've described reasonably well in terms of its paradoxes and contradictions. But men, I have noticed that in general, that the men that I know or have watched, most of them, other than the ones in in positions of power who are being paid directly to have an opinion or to say things about mass migration of a positive nature.
Most of them are estrogenic, but yeah, sorry, John. Yeah.
But most of the men just don't say anything. They virtually don't mention immigration. It's not somebody, they don't go there, as it were. It's the preponderance of public support for it. It comes from women. I see that.
Yes.
No question. And yet women are the ones being raped. They're the ones being attacked. They're the ones being
status. The high status women aren't.
Yeah.
Right.
And the men now, seeing the paradoxes at some level in themselves, are actually not inclined to intervene. This is the bizarre thing. They're not saying anymore.
Because they get destroyed. See, I think a combination of what the two of you are saying, I think what's happening is that men are starting to finally wake up to the fact that they need to stop trying to earn status in the world of women. That
Well,
they'll never be able
That's
to.
why I'm not publishing with Simon and Schuster.
I want to I want to mention that I found the name of that book that I mentioned, Stephen Baskerville's. It's called Who Lost America? Why the United States Went Communist, and communist is in scare quotes, and what to do about it. It's a really interesting book because it takes us through all of this to the idea, like to the culmination of the totalitarian moment we've arrived at. And it seems to me that that moment, ironically, going back to where we started talking about literature, was actually, and a condition was that there is at its core to it. The core condition was summarized in the first sentence, in a single sentence, the first sentence in Franz Kafka's book, The Trial, about Joseph K. He said, somebody must have been telling lies about Joseph K. because without having done anything wrong, he was arrested one fine morning. Now that's what we've been talking about. This is, all of us have been arrested.
Yes.
For what? For being men.
Because we let estrogen take over the world, because we allowed artificial status hierarchies to displace organic status hierarchies.
Well, this is the underlayment of what is changing up under Mr. Trump in America. And, you know, it is not spoken of explicitly in the terms that you're using, EM, or you're using, John. It's not explicit. But I think it's a very robust response to what's going on. And, you know, you have characters like, I think probably the person who expresses it most directly is, you know, Mr. Trump's deputy White House advisor, Stephen Miller. And we're beginning to see this very clearly, that this is what's happening in America is not the same as what's happening in Europe. Europe is behind the 8 ball. But we're coming out of this, and we're coming out of it hard. One of the things that's going to be, I think, a signal change will be, if, you know, and I may be wrong about this, but I still believe it. I think that we're going to see significant prosecutions of people who brought this shit on, starting after the Christmas holiday. I think starting in January, we're going to see the beginning of serious prosecutions of a lot of people who did a lot of bad things in America. And that's going to be a big change.
That's very interesting you say that, Jim, because I heard a whimper of that a few days ago, and it's something I used to hear maybe 2-3 years ago a lot about, and then it went underground and was like, no, that's not going to happen anymore. The white hats and the arrests of these people, these criminals, the Obamas and the Clintons and all the rest of these criminals.
Exactly.
Is there any reason? I'm not putting you on the spot, but I just wonder: is there something happening that we don't know about, or that we?
Yeah, there are a few things. One is that there's definitely a grand jury convening in the Southern District of Florida to try a 10-year conspiracy case against a group of seditionists that include everybody from James Comey, the FBI director, to, you know, the people who are still engineering lawfare fuckery, like Norm Eisen and Andrew Weissman and that whole gang, and everybody in between. That's happening, and it's a real thing, and it's going to happen. You know, the other thing is that, you know, just a couple of days ago, Mr. Trump announced that he is going to, he has hard evidence that the electoral process was fraudulent, and that he's going to bring all the evidence out in January. And Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, said essentially the same thing, I don't know, about 48 hours ago. And so, you know, a lot of people think this is bullshit, but I don't. I think they're definitely going to bring a case against the election shenanigans that have gone on, not just in America, but, you know, in many other countries.
In Ireland, in the UK.
Well, that's right. Everywhere, because that's a very key thing, because we heard about USAID and then it went away. And we want to know who got this money and what was done with it.
It wasn't just USAID. that was just a little piece of it.
There's 100 trillion war chests, 140 trillion in
Okay.
the offshore spiders
We
web.
need to know, we in these affected countries, and mine is probably the most affected, I'd say, outside the United States itself. The most damaged country, I would say, in the world is
Yes.
Ireland.
Yes.
Well, these are the people I asked you about 15 minutes ago, the people who are receiving their instructions to carry out this fucking nonsense in Ireland.
So,
Well,
gentlemen, do you think the wealthiest, most connected, most powerful people that have been doing this at will for decades are going to just let themselves be arrested and not go to civil war?
Yeah, well, I think they may try, but I think it's gone beyond that now. I don't think I'm not convinced that they're capable of doing that anymore. I think there's too much going against them now. I mean, I think they've been trying it. Their last lame attempt, their most recent lame attempt was that the 6 seditionist senators who came out with this thing about, telling the military not to obey.
So hang on a second. All right. The way in which these things go is they try everything that they can at the lower levels, but ultimately at some point they move openly.
They're going to have to kill some people.
And well, that's the point. That's the point. That's why they flooded our countries with, Europe, Commonwealth, and U.S. all told it's about 250, 260 million people who don't belong here. How are you going to get rid of them? Right? How are you going to do that?
We don't have
logistically.
How many people in the United States do you think are active saboteurs? I don't think it's more than 10,000 characters.
It only takes about 1% to 1% to be actively engaged, either physically pulling the trigger or materially supporting.
Well, it's true. I'll take your point on that, and I would also make the additional point that you can't overstate how much mayhem can be created with small arms.
Well, you also have to.
That is a big thing.
You also have to look at all of the states, cities, counties, et cetera, sheriff's departments, et cetera, which are not loyal to the United States. This country,
I don't think there are that many of them. I think
there's a lot of them. It's even right here in rural Idaho. We are in a way worse place than people think. Now, here's the good thing. If we do rise up, we do fight, it's over in 3 to 5 years, maybe 8 years at the outside, and we restore ourselves. But this thought that they're going to allow us to defeat them in the courts which they control, didn't Fannie just get off here again?
Fannie Willis?
Yeah. Or Letitia James.
Letitia James did. Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Right.
Well, you could have anticipated that, and you can see how it works. But I don't think that. I think that your view of it is a bit more severe than mine.
I'm not a conventional warfare man. I went to school to do these kinds of wars.
Yeah, well,
in other countries.
You may be right, but like I said, we're going to have to embrace the suck for a while and just accept the fact that we are, living through a disordered bottleneck of history, and see how it rolls. I do think that there's going to be a pretty serious attempt to get around this legally, and we're not
which
defenseless.
Has to be tried.
We're not defenseless that way, and we'll see how it works.
I think for the rest of the world outside of the West, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, I do think their future also depends on what happens in the United States. Because we don't have the dynamic within our own nations to do anything about this. That's the sad and terrible truth.
Yeah. It's the whole English-speaking world.
I kind of think that we're going to see at least France, England, and the UK governments be overthrown in 2026, or at least replaced. That's my
Here's the problem that we have. Government got us into this problem. Government's the solution.
But yes, but you see, the problem also is that if you look at the patterns that's happened in Sweden and other places in the last few years, where you have what are called far-right parties, they're actually not far-right at all.
Centrist.
They're centrist parties, staying the common sense that everybody believed up to about 20 years ago. But they're actually, what the pattern is, they're being blocked from entering government by the mainstream parties who lose the elections and then get together and iron out their differences so they can stymie the victory of the party that actually most of the people wanted. And
Yeah,
this
but
is
there are tipping point. There are tipping points in human affairs, and you know, I think that you're going to see some of these tipping points in Germany and France and the UK.
I think you're going to see revolutions right here in
Well,
the
that's a
US as
tipping.
well,
That's a major
because
tipping point.
as everybody keeps going, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it's all going to work itself out, we're steadily, inexorably walking towards revolution, and a bloody
How would you
revolution,
characterize that revolution, though?
overthrowing the governments.
Yeah, but is it a communist revolution? Is it
Nope.
a what is
No,
it? Is
it's
it?
probably more like the English Civil War.
Mhm.
It's probably more like the American, the Second English Civil War, which became the
well,
American, right? It's the
I,
completion of the American Revolution.
I like
Let's
to
hope
hope.
so.
I like to hope. I mentioned earlier Václav Havel and 1989, the Velvet Revolution. I like to think that that might still be possible in our
No, they
countries.
learned from that. See, that's the problem we have, John and Jim, is that the enemy learns. They've been at this for thousands of years. This is a neural pathology. It's a parasitic life form, and it learns and it adapts, and it thinks in much longer time scales than
I
most
don't think
people.
that I don't think they're as dominant as you do, and I don't think that they're
Of
as
course you don't.
powerful
Yeah.
as you do. We have a different view of that, and you know, I can't really debate the finer points of it. I just accept the fact that, you know, you're more severely pessimistic about it than I am.
So I started 25 years ago. I was in Silicon Valley, and I meditated for 10 months on where things were going.
Mm.
I was in tech. I was in fintech. I was raised the money for my first company, my first telecommunications technology company. And I could see where, myself, and there was extraordinary conversations happening 25 years ago, 26 years ago in Silicon Valley.
By the way, what did you make of your colleagues in Silicon Valley?
Well, some of them
And where are they now? I mean, what do you think of them now?
The solid ones left years ago. Silicon Valley was completely infiltrated in the 1990s and early 2000s, and by 2010 it was something completely different. But point is, I didn't start on this journey as this, where I am today. I started on the journey of, well, here's some serious problems coming, here's solutions we can do. And I spent 25 years going out and getting direct experience and doing different things, to include going into special forces and going to war and all of that. I didn't start as this guy.
Doesn't a
I've
lot of
gotten to
this?
there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doesn't a lot depend in this coming year, probably, on what is likely to be the attempted rollout of the CBDCs?
That's a distraction. Don't worry about them. They're not thermodynamically possible. It's not technologically That's a distraction from what they're actually doing every day in our communities. That's a scare tactic to get us to pay attention to this complex thing that's totally made up. It's not actually the panopticon con is what I call all this. Their surveillance state is not technologically or energetically, thermodynamically possible, just on a basis of heat transfer alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I tend to agree with energy interpretations of what's going on.
Yeah, it's all distraction, right? It's to keep us from paying attention to what they're actually doing in our communities to our people. That's the other thing that they do, is they keep doing the World War III threat, because they want us to pay attention to the big supernatural, the super organization, the superstructure, and not to the local small stuff where we could actually have an impact.
And for the benefit of people watching, listening, like, how would you define precisely what they're doing to us now on the ground?
They are trying to completely and absolutely replace us, wipe us out, because we are the only, when the English people stand, the English-speaking peoples, the native English-speaking people stand, we reset these sons of bitches. We've done it every 400 years. We've fought the same mindset since 44 AD when the Romans first arrived. It's the very same system, model, peoples, organizations, etc., adapted across time. It's the same enemy. And it's not a single family or it's not that. It's a structure. It's a system. It's a parasitic structure.
And do you think we have the means within us still, in extremis, to do the same again, to resist?
Oh, yes. See, there's a little hitch in their step. We have 3 generations who just fought a multi-generational global war, a dirty war, the global war on terror guys. And there's a lot of us, and we're in all of the countries because NATO fought the war.
Yeah, I would agree that there's a lot of latent energy in that.
Yes.
And we haven't seen it all. Just like there's a lot of latent energy in the number of pissed off men in America who have firearms.
Correct. Right. So
sorry, Ian, but it is one of the remarkable things that we have seen absolutely no manifestation of that latent energy yet. No, no massacres, no show of arms.
Because we know where it goes. Yeah, because we know that we have to exhaust every other remedy. Jim, to what you've been articulating, right? We need to exhaust all other remedies before it goes to violence.
But we discussed this before, Ian, and I remember you saying something very, very interesting. What they're trying to construct as well in anticipation of this moment is a kind of a World War II scenario whereby the Western population will balk at the idea of being smeared as Nazis.
Correct.
I wonder if we're beyond the point where we give a fuck about that anymore.
Well, we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Anything.
We're not there yet, Jim. And the reason we're not there yet is because our women aren't there.
Well,
the men are, but our women are not there yet.
That's true. In fact, they're very much not there.
Correct. And particularly the high status women who are the ones who have been doing all of this. Because down underneath what this is women created an artificial status structure, complex artificial status structure that didn't really require anything from men, but the jobs that women don't want to do and violence, wars, conflict. And they've been steadily culling the men and just diminishing the men and convincing men, John, to what you said earlier, convincing men that they have to earn status in the world of women. Well, men are done with that because that's destroyed them. The problem is that we as the English-speaking people are unlike other peoples on earth in one fundamental way. We are a law-based society and civilization. We want to exhaust every opportunity to use the law, to fix the law, and then fix the problems. Because when we go to bloodshed, we're really good at it. Really good. And the people that we have to get permission to go to that bloodshed to make that transition are our women. It's the mothers, the wives, the sisters, the daughters. Go do what you have to do, because ultimately when it comes ultimately to it, it is the burden of a woman's womb that pays the price for war.
Yes,
always. Right? The highest price of war is paid by women's wombs. And so we in the English-speaking world recognize and understand that. Unfortunately, we've allowed that to take over and control and dominate everything. But it's our women that have to give us permission.
And will they?
I don't know. That's the big, this gets back to the writer thing. How do we reach women? How do we communicate? How do we use this art form to reach women?
You see, Ian, I hear all this and I find it most interesting, and I can't argue with anything that you say. But as a man of my years, I find it difficult to endorse because I can't contribute. I can't go to war. I'm too old.
I don't know. William Marshall ran into battle at the age of 70, the Battle of Lincoln. But again, 99% of the war isn't with guns on the battlefield. It's in the mind. It's in the culture.
I feel like I've been fighting a war. I feel like I've been fighting a war
too.
For the last 20 years.
Okay, I accept that for sure. Hands up to that for certain. But it's like there is a line, a very clear red line there between that and the next phase. And in many respects, I try to talk myself and everybody else out of that as an option because it seems unthinkable. But the unthinkable may become necessary. I always acknowledge that.
Well, and that's the thing. At some point, women, the colonials in America, look at people really need to not look at the war years. They need to look at the 20 years leading up to the war, really up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Do you think those founding fathers didn't get permissions from their wives? Some of them got permission from their mothers because the mothers were the ones that owned the estates. Right?
Oh,
Well,
I 100%. I mean, they didn't. It's a strange thing, and I mean, I find that I speak of somebody who talks an awful lot about these issues down through the years, and
Yeah.
at the same time, I always find myself having to correct myself, because I have at some level absorbed the mainstream
Yeah.
culture. And the idea that women somehow are the victims of, men and the harmless, quiet, and yet I know everywhere I go and I see men and women together, I realize the women are running the couple. Always.
Yes.
well, I got to say this, that, I'm very active and I write a twice a week political blog, Clusterfuck Nation, and I have a lot of women readers who correspond with me. And I'm impressed with how much they understand about the kind of things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I don't feel isolated from the thoughts and intentions and worries of women. I feel like I'm very much in contact with them. But there's that. You're right I think in describing the particular high status elite cohort of women who are really disordering the minds of Western civilization.
Yes. They're attacking. They're burning women at the stake. They're just not using fire and stakes anymore.
The second thing is that I also agree with you about the Anglosphere men trying desperately to resolve these things through the rule of law.
Yes.
And what I think you observe with Mr. Trump, as childish and incoherent as he sometimes appears to be, he seems to be attempting to resolve these things through the rule of law as much as possible.
Yes.
He's going to the last limit of what he can do as an executive.
Totally agree.
Jim, because I'm very, I can empathize with what I think President Trump is doing there, because I kind of done it myself in my own modest corner, which is that not so much that you are, pushing this door with the expectation that it will open, but that you wish to demonstrate that it is closed.
Correct.
That it is important. You cannot proceed to the next phase without having shown your people that they will not be permitted to talk their way to freedom.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think that the climax of this could be that Mr. Trump takes this to the last limit under the rule of law, and then he becomes forced to basically declare an insurrection, declare some form of a national emergency, and then become kind of the tyrant that the left has been affecting to portray him as. Wait a minute. The catch is he's not going to give a fuck about what they call him anymore.
That's the point, because they've already booby-trapped that option.
Yeah. He's just going to take that and take the power that comes with that and run with it and do what needs to be done.
Look at the women. Look at the women around Trump. They've given him permission. His daughters and his wife.
That's the thing I've been saying to people. People have been appalled by his recent statement about the movie guy who
Reiner.
Rob Reiner.
But what did Reiner say about Trump when he got shot? What did Reiner say about?
I say, because you might well say, and I've seen one or two of even Trump supporters say this, that he might have behaved with a little bit more discretion or whatever. However, what I say to people is, well, he was honest, and he said, "I don't care.
I don't owe my enemies a damn thing."
Yeah. So he was sending out a clear message, which is in underlining time and time again. It reminds me of that scene. Do you remember way back in the 60s when Khrushchev went to the UN, and in the middle of making his speech, he took off his shoe and he started hammering the table in front of him. And he was asked afterwards why he was doing it. And he said, "I wanted to let those fuckers know that I'm crazy and they better not mess about with me."
Yeah.
Yes. Man shit.
Yeah.
That's man shit.
So now the question that leads to is, let's say Mr. Trump demonstrates exactly what I've just described. What happens in Europe and the UK as a result of that? And my guess is that it really sets off something completely unexpected and very, very disorderly.
Violence is coming. It's
Um,
coming. And it's not coming because we want it. It's coming because when a woman is been served the divorce papers and she knows the man's serious, she goes an all-out war. And by the way, they're
Yeah.
all they're all supported by attorneys. This is a system designed by attorneys for attorneys.
hold on. So
Well,
one
it's
thing.
a mathematic. It's just one point there.
Yeah.
It's a mathematical almost equation. Um, Politics is the alternative to violence. When politics fails, what's next? I mean, they have refused to listen. They have refused to allow us speak in public. They have refused to apply reason and good sense to the affairs of their own countries. What do they think is going to happen if they keep doing this?
Well, they know that's why they're trying to send everybody to die in war. So, Tommy, yeah.
I have to step out for an eye appointment that I can't miss. You guys are more than welcome to keep talking. I can just leave it up. Keep running.
I got to go do things.
I don't mean
gotta
I
go-
don't mean to end it abruptly.
I got to go to the landfill.
My mom's gonna fucking kill me.
I
Back to
will
dropping
run out of
bodies. Yeah.
I'm running out of light here. The view is gone already.
Yeah.
Actually, John, the view has been changing with the light there.
Yeah, no, it's
inside,
great.
outside's been amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
guys,
done.
Let's
A
do-
metaphor. I hope it's not a metaphor, though, Ian. Because
Well, it got more beautiful. So
Yeah,
there you go.
perfect.
There you
I'll
go.
buy that. I'll buy that.
I'll put this when I'm back. And then I'll send it to you guys. I would absolutely love to do it again and again. I apologize for ending on an abrupt note, but
No.
my mom will have my head if I miss this appointment again. So
See?
I have to go.
Got to get permission from our women.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I'll send this to you guys all when it's up later today. We'll do another one. Blah, blah, blah. Guys, go in the description. Please go follow all of them. John, Jim, EM. Thank you guys for
Appreciate
your
it,
time.
gentlemen.
All right,
Good to
guys.
see you.
Yeah,
Take
good
care, everybody.
conversation.
Thank you so much. Hey guys, real quick, you guys know Basil Baz, ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children. I just did a fundraiser with them the other day, and I'm going to put this on to every episode I do. They are special forces veterans who physically rescue trafficked children. They have since 1993. They have a 100% success rate. They do not take salaries. They all have day jobs, and they literally rescue sex trafficked children. Donations to them are a tax write-off. I get nothing from them, and they have not asked me to put this on. I've included this little clip on episodes for the last year or so, and I'm just re-recording it because I just got to meet him just 2 days ago for future. It's November 25th, 2025, but this will be on every episode now for the next year. And there is nothing better you can do with your money. If you can support them for even $5, please do that. They truly are doing the Lord's work, and I think we all have an obligation to do that. Thank you so much.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a Blue Room soon. www.blueroom.com.
Hey guys, a huge sponsor of the show is Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food. Clayton lives down in Georgia. He's been on the show before. It's actually nearby where I went to college. They are a huge sponsor of the show. They give me some money every month, even when I don't sell enough to warrant that paycheck, meaning that the show is not free. It's just that it's free for you. If you guys need prepper food, or if you're just interested in supporting the show, I'd please ask you to go to the link in the description. Go to Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food, promo code TPC for 10% off. 72 servings per pail, 25-year shelf life. These things are they double as dumbbells. Pasta Primavera, cheesy potato soup, mac and cheese, loaded baked potato casserole, chili mac, cheddar broccoli soup, cheesy lasagna, teriyaki rice. You can get banana chips. There's also raspberries, strawberries, and apples. There's a bunch of freeze-dried fruit, or you can even get seeds to plant your own garden. It's not a bad thing to have. It's like gold or ammunition. It's a good thing to have. It's a bad thing if you have to use it, but it's good. It's good to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. So that's what I'd say. And if you just want to support the show, please go to the link in the description. Please go support them because they support me. Thank you so much, guys.